Hello, communicators, students in Donna Papacosta's communication class. I know she makes you listen. Business people struggling with communication and the communicurious, welcome to For Immediate Release, where this week we'll talk about whether a brand voice needs to be consistent and what that has to do with Tom Hanks. The BBC has introduced a new communication metric. The innovative ways companies get involved with natural disasters is changing how communities deal with them, all the way up to the federal level. Would you talk with a human-looking AI in your living room or bedroom to solve a tech support problem? We'll cover all that, a bunch more, and Dan York is here with his weekly tech report, so leave those earbuds right where they are. Another fine podcast from the FIR Podcast Network.
This is For Immediate Release, the podcast for communicators, with your host, Shel Holtz.
Welcome, everybody, to episode number 159 of For Immediate Release for Monday, October 15th, 2018. I'm Shel Holtz in Concord, California, at the beginning of a fresh week that I hope is not as nuts as the last one was. I was working on an organizational purpose initiative. I knocked out six videos for our benefits open enrollment. Incidentally, those 6 videos are going to be aggregated into a single interactive video. And I'm working with Cyrus Malvawala and his company, Advantis Communications, to produce this interactive video. Very excited about that. I mentioned Cyrus because he has been a guest on FIR a couple of times. It's also budgeting time for the 2019 budget. All of this going on while I was bouncing back from my surgery 11 days ago. So the upshot of all of this is that I had no time to find a conversation partner for this week's show. So today you get just me. Next week I'll make up for that because it'll be the monthly installment of the Hobson and Holtz Report, which means Neville will be here. And episode 161, I should be back on track with a subject matter expert to talk to. I do have a follow-up from a couple of interviews I did a while back having to do with ethics issues at the Public Relations Society of America, PRSA. If you didn't hear those interviews or you don't remember the issues involved, this all started when a couple of members, accredited members, who happened to have conservative political views, took issue with what they saw as a pattern of left-leaning statements issued by the 2017 PRSA chair through the same social media channels that she used for her official PRSA pronouncements. And they saw this as an ethical issue, and it led those two members, Mary Beth West and Susan Hart, to propose some bylaw changes and to promote those changes rather aggressively with press releases and, basically applying their public relations skills to this effort to gain support for these initiatives. I talked with Mary Beth about the bylaws proposals, which led the 2018 PRSA chair, Anthony D'Angelo, to request equal time here on FIR. And while he disagreed strongly with how Mary Beth and Susan characterized some of the issues, he actually felt some of their proposed changes weren't bad. Speaking as a PRSA member myself, I also thought these proposals made sense, regardless of which side of the political aisle they came from. These amendments were basically designed to hold PRSA leadership accountable when the organization's actions conflicted with the organization's own code of ethics. The bylaws changes were up for a vote earlier this month at PRSA's National Academy, and they elected to adopt precisely none of the ethics reform measures or nonpartisanship measures into the bylaws, but they did adopt 2 board-endorsed bylaws. One of these defines what a member in good standing is, and the second establishes a grievance procedure to file complaints against individual members for infractions that could result in them losing their membership. Now, I have a couple of thoughts about this, and I want to make it really clear, just for the sake of context, that I do not share Susan and Mary Beth's politics. But as a PRSA member, again, I don't care where a good idea emerges from, and a strong ethical foundation is increasingly important these days. I wasn't at the assembly, obviously, so I have no idea what the discussion was, only what I heard. But not adopting any of these measures smells bad, while the measures they did adopt seem retaliatory. The board seems to be telling members, if you don't like how we're doing something and you make an issue out of it, watch out, because we might revoke your membership. And that seems extreme because, honestly, when was the last time a PRSA member was bounced out of the organization for violating its ethics policy? Don't go checking on Google. I will tell you when. It was 1986, and the individual in question resigned. He wasn't kicked out. Now, I get enough value out of PRSA that this isn't going to lead me to resign in a huff. Mary Beth, however, told me she may have found a new home with an organization I hadn't heard of before, the Ethics and Compliance Initiative, and she may even pursue their credential. So there's your update on this episode. And by the way, apropos of absolutely nothing except bragging, and speaking of credentialing, I sat 2 weeks ago for the Strategic Communication Management Professional exam, offered by the Global Communication Certification Council, and I passed. Woo! I'm now an SCMP. That goes after my name on my email signature. Now, I'm also an ABC, an accredited business communicator through the International Association of Business Communicators. I got that designation back in 1984 and have remained an ABC by virtue of my continued IABC membership. So what's the difference between certification and accreditation? Frankly, the terms are used interchangeably a lot of times, and as I went looking for the explanation of how they're different, I found a lot of different opinions on this. But the big ones for me are, first of all, that certification is generally associated with ISO 9001. ISO is the International Standards Organization. It's an internationally recognized standard. 9001 is for quality management systems. Certification, according to one definition I found, is used for verifying that someone has adequate credentials to practice certain disciplines. It's a written assurance by a third party, in this case the Global Communication Certification Council, that a certified individual can perform to specified requirements. So, say somebody hiring a communicator and sees that designation can feel confident that this person can perform up to that level. And there are two certifications available. One is the Communication Management Professional, and the other is the Strategic Communication Management Professional. Another difference, the certification requires me to take steps annually to retain the certification, continuing education and the like. As I say, I didn't have to do anything except remain an IABC member to keep my ABC. The accreditation exam, I should point out, was subjective. These were written essay-type responses, plus an oral exam. I recall I had about a half an hour to learn a crisis situation and was then grilled by a panel how I would handle it. And then they would interrupt me and say, "Oh, this just happened. Now what do you do?" The certification exam, on the other hand, was objective. It was 100 multiple-choice questions, each with 4 possible answers, and obviously only one of the answers was right. Although in some cases, more than one of the answers was right, and you had to pick the one that was most right. Now, for me, this was a worthwhile exercise. If nothing else, I gained a certain amount of confidence from knowing that I know this stuff, rather than just assuming that I do. And by taking the exam, I really did figure out where I need to beef up my reading based on the questions that I struggled with. So it's something to think about if you haven't gone through something like this. I'll have a link to the council in the show notes. By the way, this whole thing is an IEBC initiative, but the council itself is an independent organization, and you don't have to be an IEBC member to earn this designation. All the accreditations out there, whether it's PRSAs or CPRS or IEBCs or whoever, you had to be a member of the organization to get that. We had a listener comment this week, he said, moving on, from friend of the show, Chris Gallagher, and it's of the audio variety.
Hi, Shell. It's Chris Gallagher in Chicago. Your discussion with Doug Haslam reminded me about your example of the Ragu website from years ago, where Mama was so charming on the website, but she wasn't carried through the rest of the marketing. I thought Doug made a good point there about how Steakum's snarky Twitter handle was being carried through the rest of its materials. I also have to ask, what is the value of a Twitter follower who plans to never try your product? I don't eat Philadelphia cheesesteak, so even if I start following Steakums, I'm not ever going to buy their product. Do I have any value in any way? I'd be curious to see if I do. Otherwise, I'm just one extra person following a clever 27-year-old social media manager. I'll always look forward to hearing the things you have to say on your show. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Chris. It is always great to hear from you. Ragu, I remember that. Man, that goes back to the earliest days of the web. And the Ragu site, as Chris said, it featured Mama. In fact, it was called Mama's Cucina, Mama's Kitchen. And Mama had attitude, right? I mean, you'd see her on the homepage and there was a speech bubbled over her saying, "How come you only come over when you're hungry, huh?" And she would teach you to speak Italian on one of the pages, and the Italian that she was teaching you was all pretty snarky. It was a great site. And my point was that if I developed an affinity for this site, if I kept going back to it because it was fun, when I went to the grocery store and looked for Ragu among all of the various brands that are available on the shelf, what I was looking for was Mama. And Mama wasn't there. And this I saw as a disconnect between the people who were doing the web and the people who were doing all the rest of the marketing. Now, interestingly, there was an article that appeared on the Contently site this week with the headline, "Should Your Brand Voice Stay the Same Across Social Channels?" This piece by Emily Gaudette, no relation, I assume, to Gagalamp's Glenn Gaudette. It's spelled differently. Emily asks us to think about Tom Hanks, who, she says, has enjoyed an illustrious film career precisely because he is not a character actor. She writes that he makes small adjustments to his beloved persona depending on the film in which he's appearing, but at the core, he's still recognizable. His characters are likable in the same way, whether he's playing a cowboy doll, a World War II soldier, or a man who just discovered a mermaid. Now, the problem with defining a company's voice is that rigid guidelines can stifle you, she says, and you need to retain some elasticity to appeal to different people in different places. Be nostalgic on Facebook, where nostalgia is valued. Share business insights on LinkedIn. Be more dramatic on Twitter. One strategist called Twitter the id of the whole ecosystem, making it the ideal channel for experimenting with your brand's tone. And that's what Steakum did on Twitter. This whole discussion also reminds me of David Meerman Scott's book, Marketing Secrets of the Grateful Dead. I interviewed David about this book, so you could go find that in the FIR interviews channel on the FIR Podcast Network website. In one of the chapters of this book, David and his co-author, Brian Halligan, the CEO of HubSpot, talk about logos, and they make the point that the Dead didn't have one logo. They had several, allowing for that kind of elasticity. Compare that to, say, AC/DC or the Stones or the Doors or Van Halen, who each have one very recognizable logo. By the way, one other thing the Dead did with logos was make no attempt to prevent fans from doing stuff with them, like making their own T-shirts to sell in the parking lot. Giving their fans some freedom to be engaged like that made those fans into bigger fans, just as allowing the taping of their shows spread the music to new listeners who then became fans. Anyway, Chris, you also asked about your value as a follower of the Steak-'em account, and, well, it depends. If all you do is read the tweets, you bring minimal value to Steak-'em, although you're not a bot, so you do add a legitimate follower to the tally of the total number of followers, and that's a metric that has some value to some organizations. But if you retweet something you appreciated, or you tell a friend how amusing or insightful the account is, you could bring someone to the account who may like cheesesteak and may end up going out and buying it. So even if you never buy a single pack of Steak-'em, you could still have value to the brand as a follower. Chris's question about her value as a follower is a natural lead into our first new item this week, which is also about measurement. Communicators spend a lot of time debating the value of certain kinds of measurement. As I've reported here, the Barcelona Principles from the International Association for the Measurement and Evaluation of Communication says that advertising value equivalencies, AVEs, are not a valid measurement. I wholeheartedly agree. They suck as a measurement. I feel the same way about reach and impressions, which generally don't mean a damn thing about how well you've communicated. This many people had an opportunity to see what we sent out. Yeah, well, did that move the needle at all? Really? I remember reading one piece about a video that only reached 100 people but landed the company the biggest client they ever had. You didn't need reach for that. You needed targeting. And that gets to what good measures are. Attention and engagement, for example, are good measures, but ultimately it's all about the outcome that you were able to produce. That's the gold standard. Did you change anyone's mind? Did you affect their behavior? Did they buy your product? Did they support your initiative or vote for your candidate? Well, let's talk about a new metric that has been instituted by the British Broadcasting Corporation. The Content Marketing Division of BBC Global News, it's a unit called BBC Storyworks, has added a long-term memory metric to the way it measures the impact of the content that it produces for clients. They studied how content triggers long-term memory, which in turn drives results. The study was released just last week as part of an initiative that goes back to 2016 that aims to understand how emotion affects the relationship that people have with a brand. They got 2,000 people to watch 6 branded videos from real companies, and they studied facial coding, eye tracking, and long-term memory. Across all 6 films, they recorded a 61% increase in brand consideration. That's not bad. But listen to what Hamish McFarlane had to say. He's the head of Insight for BBC Global News. For a while, we have been understanding emotional engagement in branded films. The next step was looking at other aspects and how do we make things enduring. It's fine to say there's an impact, but we need to look at how long does the impact last. Traditionally, researchers measure decay by calling people up a week after exposing them. So here's what they found. First, the bigger the emotional spike during a video, the more likely it is to trigger long-term memory. Second, branded videos that had more than 10 emotional moments score high in consideration and how the brand fared against its competition. Third, videos where emotional states were established in the first third of the film did better at triggering longer-term memory than those where it showed up in the second or third third. So the challenge for communicators is going to be in applying the results of this study as a planning tool. We talk a lot about storytelling in communication. The best stories, obviously, are ones that provoke emotions, and the evidence supports building emotion and emotional peaks into our storytelling. And since the data says that these emotional elements of our stories make people remember the brand longer, that's definitely something to measure, and not just the typical call a week later. How we go about doing that, I'm not sure, but it seems to me that if we can tell our bosses and our clients that our communication made an indelible impression and that they'll remember us down the road, that could produce a sale, for example, a year from now, That's a pretty useful metric. There was yet another natural disaster last week. This is getting to be kind of routine. It was actually kind of remarkable that the cable news networks didn't deliver wall-to-wall coverage of Hurricane Michael. You may recall the day that Michael made landfall in Florida, there were about 150 other big breaking news stories. They could have gone wall-to-wall on a dozen of those. But it also could be hurricane fatigue. Remember, Florence had just happened, and they did go wall-to-wall on that. But anyway, we're starting to see a shift in the way businesses respond to these disasters. Let's put aside cable news networks and look at companies where most of us invest most of our time and energy. Historically, a lot of the companies that we work for do the right thing in general. They serve affected communities. They help customers. They help their own employees. They donate food, water, and shelter. They give cash to relief organizations. I was judging entries in Reagan Communications Corporate Social Responsibility Awards just a couple of weeks ago, and I couldn't believe how many of the entries were about Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria back in 2017. But an article in a publication called Sustainable Brands points out that companies are starting to respond in more innovative ways. And that's leading communities to actually change the way they go about recovering from disasters. And I have a slew of examples. My favorite example has to do with how FEMA decides where it's going to go set up shop in order to be on site for a disaster, how they know the disaster is going to be bad enough to warrant their getting their facilities up and running at the site of the disaster. And it has to do with Waffle House. You ever eat at a Waffle House? I did once. I think I'm still burning off the calories from that visit. But Waffle House is open 24/7. They only close their doors under the most extreme circumstances. When a hurricane hits, their goal is to stay open as long as it's safe. They figure that they can serve first responders, rescue personnel, people who live in the community, and employees by providing food, water, shelter, and power. So FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, has developed what they call the Waffle House Index, and it activates the index during storms to figure out how severe the storm's going to be. If a Waffle House is going to close, that tells them that it's going to be really, really bad. That leads FEMA to assume that it needs to establish a presence for that storm. How the actions of a restaurant chain in terms of staying open or closing drive the decision that a federal agency makes about how it's going to serve the community in response to that disaster, that's just really, really interesting. But there are other examples in this article. Airbnb has what it calls its Open Homes program. It lets displaced people and emergency responders find free temporary lodging. Amazon has an Alexa donations feature. All you have to do is say, Alexa, donate to Hurricane Florence disaster relief, or whatever. Anheuser-Busch shifted its production from filling cans with beer to filling them with water and sent more than 300,000 cans of drinking water to North and South Carolina and Virginia, and a couple of other brewers followed suit. Delta waived bag and pet fees and capped fares from areas in Florence's path. Discover Financial Services matched customer donations to the American Red Cross, assuming they made their donation using their Discover card or their card member rewards points. Lyft offered free rides. Pepsi donated 350,000 meals to relief agencies and donated $1 million. Target activated a green team. This was a collection of people who worked in human resources, corporate social responsibility, properties, distribution, security, and other departments. These folks identified the needs of each community, whether their stores had to close or could stay open, which products were going to sell out, and how stores and employees could be protected. Tesla pushed over-the-air updates to make batteries last longer so people could get farther without having to stop and charge. Tyson Foods operated a cook site at local plants for anyone who needed a hot meal. They dispatched cook teams from 4 states. Verizon offered free calling, text, and data for customers in North and South Carolina, and its major competitors followed suit. And Walmart created a hurricane response webpage, publishing immediate updates and what the company was doing in response. So let me ask you, what is your company's plan for a disaster? Now, according to this article, you should have a disaster response strategy that goes beyond the basics, and I agree. When I say we've entered the era of the purposeful organization, it's not just taking sides on social or political issues. It's going beyond your grandfather's corporate social responsibility. I work for a construction company, a general contractor. What could we do in the wake of an earthquake? We're in San Francisco, and our second major office is in Los Angeles. I lived about 1.5 miles from ground zero of the Northridge earthquake in 1994. I know how badly a community needs help after a disaster like that. You don't want to be thinking about this as you're surveying the rubble. You want to have a plan to activate. So I'm thinking, as a builder, what could we do after an earthquake? I think if we have a plan, we could do a lot, and we could do it quickly. Now, in September, the Associated Press reported that scientists expect there to be more hurricanes that are wetter, possess more energy, and intensify faster. In the purpose-driven marketplace, companies should be playing a bigger role in the lead up to these disasters and in the recovery from them. So let me know if your company has implemented any special procedures or practices, anything different. I'll report on what you're doing on next week's show. For Immediate Release is sponsored by Igloo Software, and I hope today's segment knocks you out as much as it did me. As you probably know, I've been talking to Priti Mbayua, who is the Regional Coordinator and Knowledge Manager for the Africa Resource Center, which is a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation initiative designed to improve supply chain for healthcare medicine in Africa. And Priti, who's based in Cape Town, has been talking about the genesis of the organization, which is essentially a startup, and how they have been employing Igloo Software as a tool to make knowledge available across the various boundaries of the organization. And last week, as she was talking about this, she thought it might make sense to talk about the various kinds of members that they're bringing on board. And this speaks, I think, to how a tool like Igloo Software can be such an important resource in an organization. So I'm going to let Priti do the talking at this point.
We have our donor partners, which is different individuals from different donor agencies. And we also have our private sector partners, which is people from the different private companies that we partner with. And also we have academia. So we see the value in having our universities on the continent contributing towards the agenda of improving availability of medicines at their point of need. And then we also have implementing partners who are also doing the actual groundwork of strengthening supply chains. And then we also have people from ministries of health and the different other state institutions that exist on that platform. So from this membership, what we're trying to do when it comes to the connect piece is that we don't want these partners to exist in isolation. We want them to exist in this space and be able to connect with each other. You can ask questions, you can directly message a certain individual. And also one of the really cool feature that we have is that when you sign up for the community, you can also sign up to say, I am an expert in a certain field. And so if, let's say, a government partner is looking for an expert in that, like, let's say, in supply chain management or demand planning, they can actually go on the community to connect with someone who's signed up as a demand planning expert. And so it makes it easier for government to actually find the resources that they need.
Now, I don't know about your organization. Mine has identified subject matter experts across the spectrum of the company, and they are housed somewhere on SharePoint. But how often they are actually accessed by other people in the organization, I never hear about this. And a tool like Igloo Software that makes it easy for somebody who's doing one thing to find an expert in a dimension of that they happen to need at the time is awesome. And if this excites you as much as it did me, and you have the appetite to bring in a new digital workplace environment, you should definitely check out Igloo Software. You can find them at www.igloosoftware.com/FIR and learn all about how you can use it free in perpetuity for up to 10 people. Again, www.igloosoftware.com/FIR. And next week we'll be hearing more from Pretty about how Igloo is being employed at the Africa Resource Center. Regular listeners know how I come up with the stories to talk about on FIR. If you're not a regular listener, I'll tell you briefly, I subscribe to a ton of email newsletters. If you're not subscribing to newsletters from SmartBrief, man, you're missing a real opportunity to stay current on stuff. But I subscribe to others as well. I use Nuzzle to see what links the people I follow have shared and what links their friends are sharing. And I have a dozen or so other sources. When I find something I think would be worth covering on the show, I save it to my Tumblr blog. Then when I'm preparing to record the show, I go through the Tumblr blog and make my final choices. Now, not everything I save to the Tumblr blog is necessarily for FIR, though. I do save some that can be useful for work, even if it's just to share it with someone who might get some value from it. For instance, I read about the new use of sensors in concrete. This is part of the whole Internet of Things ecosystem, and I sent that to the head of our concrete unit. I read about robots doing painting and eliminating the need for scaffolding. I sent that around. I see a lot of stuff I share with my boss, who's the Senior VP of Human Resources, or with our benefits manager, or our recruiting manager, or our learning and development director. This is why I bookmarked a piece from the Gallup website, and Gallup reported on this because they regularly measure employee engagement. In fact, they invented the whole field of employee engagement. This was a piece about designing the employee experience. Now, employee experience is something that we are very focused on, and I thought this piece, while it was generally kind of fundamental, made one really important point. After going through the usual employee experience stuff, the article said that a culture that reflects your organization's purpose and brand can only happen intentionally through the coaching provided by great managers. Unfortunately, this article said, most managers are less clear on what is expected of them and have higher stress levels than the people they manage. Getting the employee experience right starts with getting the manager experience right. Your purpose, brand, and culture will be lived out through your managers, how they set expectations in their ongoing conversations with employees, and how they hold the people they manage accountable. Now, I have issues with relying on managers as part of the communication process. I'm not a huge believer in the cascade where managers are a wild card. There's research that shows they don't like to communicate with the people who report to them, and they're wildly inconsistent in their communication capabilities. Not one of them was hired as a manager because how well they communicate with employees. But that doesn't mean you should ignore them. And Gallup's right that the employee experience is going to depend on having managers who live the purpose, the values, the culture, and instill those characteristics in their staff. One of my goals, which emerged from our internal communications audit earlier this year, is to treat managers as a discrete audience for communication. We've established a managers hub on the internet, which is no great innovation. Companies have been doing that since intranets were fresh and new, and I have my own qualms about how effective that will be because I just don't think people go to intranets for that kind of content. But we're launching a blog as part of the hub, and we'll invite posts from anyone throughout the company who has something worthwhile to share. But I've stolen, I have adapted an idea from Rockwell Collins. I'm sad to think that this might vanish at Rockwell Collins. We'll have to see what United Technologies does if it succeeds in its efforts to acquire the company. And we should know that pretty much any day. UTC's CEO said last month they expected to close the deal this month. Anyway, what they did at Rockwell Collins is introduce a video series that focuses on leadership. It's aimed at managers, and it is terrific. The story goes that they were burned out on stuffy talking heads and didn't think they'd get funding if that was the approach they took. So they went another direction. One of the members of the team, this is a woman named Jackie Pelland. She's the Leadership Development Program Manager. She became the host of this video series, which is called Jack Chat. These are short, they're funny, they're instructive, and they cost nothing. They're shot on an iPhone and edited using iMovie. Incidentally, when I learned about Jack Chat, they were posting a new episode every 2 to 3 weeks on the company's internal leadership development Google Plus community. More on that later in the show. But if this is going to survive the acquisition, it's also going to have to find a new home. Anyway, Jackie Pelland became something of a celebrity in the company because these videos got viewed something like 3,500 times, and they've produced considerable buzz. So we're going to do the same thing. My boss liked the idea, and I was down in L.A. having a meeting with our HR guy there, and he was so enthusiastic when I told him about it that about 3 or 4 days later, he sent me an email saying, here's episode 1, and he had done it. He had shot it and edited it. It turns out he's really, really good at this stuff. So we're calling this Hard Hat, and we're 4 episodes into it. We haven't released any. We're building a bank of these and blog posts that we'll use when we launch the blog. And this guy is just perfect. I mean, he really brings the humor and the personality and the authenticity to this. They're all under 2 minutes, and it is my hope that we will have a mobile channel we can distribute this on, because again, I don't think people are going to come to a website to watch this type of thing. I don't know, we may just create a restricted YouTube channel and get people to pay attention to the fact that it's there. There are other things that I'm doing in my effort to communicate with managers as a group to make them more integral to the employee experience. We're going to distribute recognizable FAQs when issues arise where their employees may come to them with questions. We're going to do a monthly email that lists the things we want to make sure that they talk about with their direct reports. All of this designed to give them a great manager experience that they can in turn deliver to their employees. And I'm really curious, for very selfish purposes, what are you doing to communicate with managers as a discrete audience in your organization? Head on over to the Facebook group, the FIR Facebook group, and let me know. I will share some of what you're doing on an upcoming show.
Hello, Shell and FIR listeners all around the world. It's Dan York coming at you from Montreal, Canada this week. Up here doing some college tours with my teenage daughter. But hey, the big news, of course, is the internet did not die last Thursday, October 11th. The DNS security, the DNSSEC key rollover that happened at the center of the internet's DNS system worked perfectly fine. It was a non-event. It was uneventful. Things just worked, which was exactly what we wanted to happen. So all is good. The DNS is now has a new key, which is great from the sense that we now know we can do it. So we're building a higher level of trust in the services that are part of the public core of the internet. So great news, good things. The internet did not die. But what did die was Google+. Google announced that they were going to be shutting it down. Now, there was a data breach of a huge number of records, but what they said in their post was, it said, the review did highlight the significant challenges in creating and maintaining a successful Google Plus that meets customers' expectations. Given these challenges and the very low usage of the consumer version of Google Plus, we decided to sunset the consumer version of Google Plus. To give people the opportunity to transition, we will implement this wind down over a 10-month period, slated for completion by the end of next August. Yes, indeed, you have 10 months to get your data, if you want it, off of Google+, or if you have a community there, as I do know there are a number of good communities that are working there, you need to transition it to somewhere else. So that was the big news. No more Google+. No more Google+ at all in 10 months. Now, something new that came out, though, was this week Spotify announced that they were opening up the podcast beta to everyone. You could submit your own podcast and get it into Spotify for playing there. You may recall that I think I mentioned on the show a couple of years ago that Spotify had opened up the beta program, and you had to apply to do it. You could get in there and be part of Spotify that was there. But now they've announced it to everyone. So you can go and fill it out. You just need the RSS of your podcast feed and put it in there, answer a couple questions, and boom, in a couple hours, or it took maybe a day, I think, you'll wind up being in there, and you can be found by people. I put my The Dan York Report podcast, which is my SoundCloud thing that I do occasionally. I put that in there, and now you can find it inside Spotify and listen to it. So, another way to get podcasts out to people for all the folks using Spotify in some way. You can learn more if you want to at podcasters.spotify.com. They also had an announcement on October 3rd where this was all being announced that was going on. Now, what's also interesting, thinking of Spotify, was that we had a couple of interesting hardware announcements this week. For one, Facebook announced its first branded hardware product for home users called the Facebook Portal. It's a device. It's kind of about the size of a Echo Show from Amazon or something that lets you go and stream video and do video calls, really, is what it's designed for. So you can go and make video calls to other people who have the Facebook Portal or to people on Facebook or Facebook Messenger. You also, and this was the hook to the last story, you can play music or things through Spotify or Pandora, or you can stream video from Facebook's Facebook Watch program. Now, what's interesting, of course, is that they are limited devices. These things, they do not have any web browser. You can't, amusingly, you can't browse Facebook from these devices. They are just there primarily as a video device. It'll be interesting to see what the take-up is. Also interesting is that it includes Amazon's Alexa voice assistant, and they claim that they will also be bringing in Google Assistant at some point too. So you have this kind of Facebook device out there. Now, whether you trust Facebook in light of their massive data breach and all the other trust issues is a separate question. It was interesting that the video camera on these things does include a physical blocking device so that you could physically put a cover on it type of thing. We shall see. Now, of course, Google had a whole bunch of announcements this week as well, and they had some more hardware devices. A new Home Hub, which is kind of like the Echo Show or the Facebook Portal, only without a camera. So you can view things, you can do that kind of stuff, but you can't transmit video. I think Google was partly playing up the trust aspect of that it wasn't going to be spying on you or doing things like that. They had Pixel tablets, they had lots of stuff. So exciting times in the hardware space and all this. We also saw some of these services looking at more ways to keep people in those services. One was Snapchat, which we haven't talked about for a bit. Snapchat announced a whole bunch of new shows, daily shows. So they're funding new content and having daily shows, 4 to 5 minute segments for many of these, that will be coming out. 12 new shows they announced, and those will be available now. Well, or over the next couple of months. But that's one thing that was announced. The other thing was Facebook announced that they're now supporting 3D photos that use artificial intelligence. Now, it sounds a little bit more dramatic, but what it really means is that with certain cameras, and right now it seems to be limited to the iPhone 7S, 8 or 7 Plus, 8 Plus, X, or XS, on those photos, when you take photos in portrait mode, they include some depth maps that are part of it. And this service from Facebook will now take those depth maps and use some kind of machine learning, some kind of AI to go and convert those into 3D photos. So, but again, this is something only available inside of Facebook. So it's another tool to get you to create interesting stuff that keeps people inside of Facebook. But again, cool stuff going on out there. So that's all from this week. You can find more of my audio and writing at danyork.me. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I do know some people with thriving communities on Google+. Sherry Rosen has a really good internal communications community. There's actually a pretty big podcasting community there. I still get notices from that one all the time. I spot them when I go into my YouTube account, that notification spot up in the upper right-hand corner of the page, and most of the time I click that, it's not a YouTube notification, it's a Google Plus notification, and odds are it's from that podcasting community. But I have to admit, short of the posts I see when a notification intrigues me, I haven't made a deliberate visit to Google Plus in maybe a year, maybe more. When I shared the news that Google was shutting it down, the most common response I got was some variation of, "You mean it wasn't already gone?" There was a lot to like about Google Plus, honestly, but its main drawback was that it took a lot of work to build and maintain a circle, which is what they called communities of interest. You may remember they were the first social network that advertised on TV, and the focus was all about circles. These were the people you connected to based on various interests. And, with Facebook and Twitter already attracting the bulk of social media users at that point, Google Plus really didn't stand a chance. We had our social community for FIR listeners there, and because so many people didn't use Google Plus, we wound up moving it onto a Facebook group. Now, I have read some people lamenting the imminent closure of Google Plus, if next August can be called imminent. There are people who thought it really was the very best social network, but hey, I'm sure there were people who thought Jaiku was as good as it could possibly get, too. Which makes me think that Google ought to give up at this point on trying to build a social network. I mean, they are trying to make Google search results look like a social media feed, and maybe that's as far as they want to go. They have tried and failed with Orkut, Dodgeball, which was an acquisition that competed with Foursquare, Jaiku, which they acquired and was supposed to take on Twitter. There was Wave, there was Buzz. None of them went anywhere. They're all gone, and Google should get the message at this point. So let's talk about artificial intelligence, something that Google will probably do quite well with. There were two really interesting developments last week. One that can make you feel optimistic, if a little weirded out, at the prospects for AI, and another that stands as a cautionary tale. So let's take the creepy but cool story first. It comes from Magic Leap, which may seem odd because Magic Leap is a mixed reality company, but they demoed a tool called Mica, M-I-C-A, and VentureBeat called this a human-like AI that can be viewed in the Magic Leap 1. This is the company's AR glasses. Now, Magic Leap is a company that emerged out of nowhere and immediately got $500 million in investments from companies like Google because they supposedly had this amazing mixed reality capability. They had a video that showed an elephant standing in your hand. They said they could do this without glasses, and there was great disappointment when they rolled out their glasses. And initial reviews were not that great, but then they introduced some programs to run on it, and over time we've been seeing more enthusiasm about what the Magic Leap glasses can do. Now, so far, Mica, and this is a young woman with a page boy kind of haircut, she doesn't speak, but she is very attentive. Dean Takahashi, the author of the VentureBeat piece, said, "I moved my head forward and looked into her eyes. She did the same and looked at me. I moved my head back, and she moved her head back too. She was mimicking some of the movements she saw me make." Now, what this gives you is a certain amount of empathy from this AI personality. Speech is coming. So let's imagine you have a customer service issue. You could go the usual route, right? You can post something on the Facebook group and wait for a reply. You can pick up the phone and call the 800 number and deal with that rigmarole. Or you pop on your AR glasses and call up Mica, your customer service rep. She's empathetic and she's loaded to the gills. She really could have gills, She's loaded to the gills with answers to questions and solutions to problems. Keep in mind, AI is all about prediction. What's the best answer to your question? Which of the stack of resumes belongs to the best possible hire? More on that in a minute. What treatment for this patient will produce the best result? Which posts to social media suggest a crisis is looming? What you get here would be a face-to-face encounter with an empathetic character who cares about you and your problem and solves it with no hold time No passing you off to tier 2 support. And I can see this for training, for buying airline tickets. This marriage of AI and AR has some truly spectacular potential. And it's a little creepy, I suppose, but the more common it becomes, the less creepy it'll be. What's genuinely creepy is the AI recruitment system that Amazon was using. Like I say, AI works because you feed it a ton of data about a particular subject, and it predicts, based on what you want to know, the best whatever. Well, according to Reuters, Amazon spent years working on an AI system to automate recruiting. It would look through the stack of resumes it had received and deliver a short list of the best candidates. It is looking for information in the resume that will predict who will fit the company culture and do well at Amazon. So what did Amazon feed this particular AI? 10 years worth of resumes from people applying for jobs at Amazon. Now, Amazon's part of the tech industry, which is notoriously male-dominated, so based on the data it was given, the recruitment system started favoring male candidates over female candidates. It literally downgraded resumes with the word women's in them. It assigned lower scores to graduates of women-only colleges. Words male engineers used a lot, like executed and captured, resulted in a higher ranking. Now, once the engineers at Amazon discovered the bias, they tried to fix it. Ultimately, they decided it was impossible to keep it from discovering new ways to discriminate against female candidates, so they killed it. This all happened early in 2017. We're just now learning about it thanks to the Reuters report. Now, AI is still in its early days, and I'm confident that they'll figure out a way to fix this sort of thing. It's the same problem Microsoft had with Tay. Remember the AI Twitter bot that scumbag Twitter users taught to be racist? But consider Facebook. They were testing a tool called Fairness Flow that would spot bias, racial, gender, or age bias, and their first use for it was for job seekers with companies advertising open positions on Facebook. But what we should be worried about with AI right now is the biases that the companies behind these systems haven't discovered. For now, that's something to be concerned about. For Immediate Release is sponsored by Social Chorus. And if you are looking for a tool that is going to help you reach all employees, get the right message to the right employees at the right time, and deliver the kinds of measurable results that matter to leadership, deliver genuine return on investment, there are certain things that you look for in a product like that. It doesn't hurt if that product has won some awards, and Social Chorus has won an award. It was awarded the Standout Product Launch Award at Amplitude's Amplify Product Conference in San Francisco. This was just about a week ago. Amplitude is an analytics software package for web and mobile. Social Chorus uses them, so they went to their conference. Everybody has a conference these days. In fact, Social Chorus has announced the date for its 2019 conference. We just got past Dreamforce in San Francisco from Salesforce, which is the first and undoubtedly the biggest of these conferences. But I digress. Amplitude's Amplify conference is their product conference where they brought in customers and others, and they announced awards at this conference, and Social Chorus won the Standout Product Launch Award for its Innovation Lab. Now, the Innovation Lab was just announced a couple of months ago. We covered it here, and I have talked about it since it was launched. This is the initiative that Social Chorus has undertaken to provide essential product features that really help communicators streamline their workflows, automate tedious tasks, and engage with their workforce in the smartest way possible. Of course, this wasn't the only award that Amplitude handed out. There were 5 other award categories: Voice of Customer, Product Leader, which, by the way, was won by AB InBev, which is a Social Chorus customer, and 3 other categories. The event itself, according to a blog post on the Social Chorus blog, was a masterclass in product management techniques and went deep into topics like user retention and growth. So congratulations to Social Chorus for this honor. The Innovation Lab is certainly deserving of it. I'm excited about it. You will be too if you visit www.socialchorus.com to learn all about it and the myriad other ways that Social Chorus can help you improve your communication with your employees. Again, www.socialchorus.com, and I can't begin to express my gratitude to the folks at Social Chorus for their support of For Immediate Release. If you've been listening to For Immediate Release for a long time, you will remember a segment that Neville and I used to do called 1 Minute News. We even had a theme for 1 Minute News. And these were 1 minute or less stories, and we would bounce back and forth between them. This was all an effort to shorten up the show. I have several stories I want to cover today. I don't want to spend a lot of time on any of them, so let's consider this sort of a flashback to that old 1 Minute News feature. I may even go see if I can find the music for that and insert it here.
1 minute in the news. 1 minute. 1 minute news.
In any case, we'll start with Delta Airlines, which is going to let its customers vote in a Twitter poll for the Christmas movie that it's going to show during the holidays this year on its planes. You get to choose from 4. There's Elf, Home Alone, New Year's Eve, which I gotta say I don't think I've even heard of. It looks like some sort of ensemble romantic comedy, and Die Hard, which I just find really interesting. I mean, Die Hard makes most lists of the best Christmas movies. I consider it a Christmas movie. Michelle and I watch it every Christmas. Die Hard 2 is also a Christmas movie. Bruce Willis apparently gets really upset when he hears this. He insists it's not. But in any case, I think it's really interesting that Delta is turning to Twitter to crowdsource from its customers which movie it should play on board during the holidays. Our next item comes from Pocket. I'm a Pocket user. This used to be known as Read It Later. It's a great way to save stuff that you find online so that you can read it later. I never understood why they changed the name to Pocket. Read It Later was descriptive. I understand you're putting these items in your pocket for later access, but come on, Read It Later worked. Well, they're releasing an update. It's more visually appealing, but in this era of voice as the primary interface, they're also adding a voice to Pocket. Basically, what you can do is select this option and it will read the list of items that have been saved for you. It'll read that to you in a pleasant voice. Some people are referring to this as your own private little Pocket podcast. In fact, that's what the CEO of the company calls it, your own personal podcast. And I have to admit, I might be more inclined to pay attention to that list if, I'm in my car and I can't sit there and read it, but I can choose to listen to it from among the podcasts I have available to me. This is going to be available over iOS, Android, and the web. It's all out now, as a matter of fact. As Pocket introduces a new feature, Twitter is removing one. As of the 23rd of this month, you'll have to go to their website if you want to create a Twitter moment. Raise your hand if you have ever created a Twitter moment. I never have, but the platform has killed the ability to create moments in its mobile apps because, like me, lots of people aren't using it. On their support blog, they said, when features aren't used as often, we'll remove them so we can focus on building the products you'll love. Man, that language is so common in this industry. If you forgot what moments were, it was a way to stitch together multiple tweets to tell a story. They have their own editors doing moments around news and cultural events and the like, but you could create one too, and you still can. If you go to the website, you make it out of your own tweets and other people's tweets, and it's just this collection of tweets, including images and videos around one central topic. Consider them curated stories that live in the Moments tab. But, let's face it, most people use Twitter on their phones, and the fact that you can't create a moment anymore suggests that it's probably not being used very much at all. So goodbye to the ability to create moments on Twitter on your phone. I have been talking on the show about IGTV, Instagram TV, the dedicated app that lets you share vertical videos. It's Instagram's effort to compete with YouTube and Facebook Watch, and it really hasn't taken off, although there's data that shows that video series are catching on IGTV. I have an irrational like of IGTV. I am irrationally optimistic that it is going to take off. It will gradually gain steam and get followers who are watching regular series and looking for interesting content. But as a sign that there are others who are possibly as enthusiastic as I am, Meredith, the publishing company out of Des Moines, I once did a consulting gig for Meredith. It's the only time I've ever been in Des Moines. I remember it well because when my client was driving me to the airport, she apologized for the traffic. And I looked around and I said, "I'm sorry, traffic?" I guess everything's relative. But anyway, Meredith is going to publish 10 original series for IGTV. The first of these is going to premiere later this year. It'll be from Parents Magazine, starring an undisclosed group of celebrity moms. There's going to be one from Eating Well. It's going to be a vegan cooking show, Travel and Leisure. We'll have a travel show starring Instagram influencers touring the cities that they live in. Real Simple's beauty director is going to host a beauty show offering makeup tips for commuters. Now, the reason I think this is a big deal is that you have to believe that they're going to invest some money in promoting these series, which will introduce a lot of people to IGTV who will then look around for other stuff. So I am kind of chuffed by Meredith's announcement and very hopeful that it's going to play a role in boosting the fortunes of Instagram TV. And I have a blockchain story for you to wrap things up. This is about an organization called Civil. This is actually an Ethereum-based platform that's making a pretty serious bid to save journalism. That's a lofty goal. And they have partnered with Forbes to keep its stories free from meddling hands, as the story on Bitcoin Magazine explained. The announcement was made by the co-founder of Civil, Matt Coolidge, just last week in a blog post. He called the partnership a major milestone for blockchain-based journalism. The whole idea here is that you record the article on the blockchain, which proves its provenance. Nobody can come along and say, "No, we wrote this article, that's why we published it on our site." Forbes is going to initiate its relationship with Civil next year. They're going to integrate Civil software with its own custom-built CMS. It's called Birdie for whatever reason. And once that process has been finalized, journalists working under the Forbes umbrella will be able to upload metadata, that is, information pertaining to who published the story and when, to the Civil network at the same time they upload the story to Forbes.com. According to the article in Bitcoin Magazine, the hope is that publishing this metadata into the blockchain will help to establish the author's identity and credibility. For added assurance, a Civil badge will appear next to articles as a signal that the content's metadata has been recorded to the blockchain. So another communication-related application for blockchain, which Sally Getch, who is a longtime listener and contributor to FIR, and the WordPress power behind our website, sent me a YouTube video that I have to confess, for the reasons I articulated at the beginning of the show, I haven't had time to watch yet, but it's, I believe, from MIT, and it explains why we should all be rejecting blockchain. It is on my to-do list, but it seems evident to me that the number of blockchain initiatives that are being established that solve some real problems. These are not people chasing a shiny object. They're saying, wow, look at this. We can use this to address that issue that has been plaguing us for so long. This is all indicative that blockchain really is going to take off, and it really will be disruptive to the way we are accustomed to getting things done. And Sally, I promise to watch that video this week and say something about it on the next episode. Maybe I'll get Neville to watch it and we'll both have a conversation about it. How's that? But that'll do it for this episode of For Immediate Release, episode number 159 for Monday, October 15th, 2018. As I mentioned, Neville will be with me next week for the October edition of the Hobson and Holtz Report, and we will be happy to make our entire show about stuff that you tell us to talk about. We will make it a 100% listener-powered show. All you have to do is tell us what to talk about. Send a comment to fircomments@gmail.com. Attach up to a 3-minute audio file. We will play it as the lead-in to our discussion on that topic. You can record a comment directly from the FIR website. There's a send voicemail tab on the right-hand side of the page. Click it and record just like Chris Gallagher did for her comment at the top of this episode. You can leave a comment directly on the show notes for this episode, which you will find at firpodcastnetwork.com, and you can share your thoughts on the FIR community on Facebook. Remember, I am starting 2 discussions there, one about how your companies are taking innovative approaches to disaster response, and the other about how you are addressing managers in your organization as a discrete audience. Also, if you would be so kind as to leave a rating and or review of FIR on iTunes primarily, or wherever you get your podcast, presuming that they have a place where you can rate and review the shows that you subscribe to, that would be awesome, because that is where people discover new podcasts to listen to. And until next week, that will be a 30 for immediate release.